All right, let's get
Welcome.
started. So good morning and good afternoon for some of you. I'm very excited that you have taken time out of your busy day to be here for what I have been touting as a riveting 45-minute seminar. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. We have you all muted currently, so please be respectful of others on this call and try to keep yourself muted. As Greg mentioned, questions can be typed into the chat function directly to him at the bottom of your screen during the presentation. We will try to address all of the questions after the presentation, and if we're unable to address them due to time constraints, we will email you directly with answers. Again, as he mentioned, this presentation will be recorded and a recording will be available on our website, hayesfinancialgroup.com, later this week. So without further ado, let's jump in. I think the best place to start is with why the topic of fiduciary liability and fiduciary governance is so important. Class action lawsuits against plan sponsors first emerged in 2006, with the main targets being billion-dollar mega plans with names like Lockheed Martin, Caterpillar, and General Dynamics. And from then, it hasn't stopped. Lawsuits against plan sponsors have been pervasive this year. According to the Groom Law Group, there were more than 200 ERISA class actions filed this past calendar year, which was an all-time high. It was an 80% increase over 2019 and more than double the number of 2018. The suits ranged from alleging bad fund choices to poor plan designs and underperformance, though excessive fees and expensive share classes remained a central theme. Today, it isn't just the mega plans that are seeing the impact. Lawsuits are slowly making their way downstream as well. We can all agree that unfortunately, these cases are not a passing trend. Their pervasiveness highlights how important it is for those who work with retirement plans to understand the evolution of the law, of their responsibilities under ERISA, as well as the evolution of the lawsuits themselves. By understanding how the court systems and the DOL currently interpret those responsibilities, plan sponsors and fiduciaries can be better prepared to implement sound due diligence and governance processes to help insulate their plans against litigation or audit. Before we review some cases, I think it's important to note that the purpose of reviewing litigation is not to scare you, but to review the resulting best practices that we can learn from them. I want to start by highlighting a few cases so you can get an idea of where we are seeing some of these trends as you continue to enhance your internal processes and due diligence. With the time we have today, I can only scratch the surface, but if you're interested in a deeper dive, there's a great white paper by Janice Henderson Investors that I'd be happy to share if you email me after this call. I'm going to be leveraging some of that information in the next few slides as well. I feel it's necessary to stress one more time that the outcomes from these cases can be used as models for best practices by plan sponsors, but they should not be interpreted as blanket advice for all plans. The first emerging theme we see is small plans. So in 2014, an auto body plan here locally in Minnesota with just shy of $10 million in assets was targeted for egregious fees. It was alleged that participants incurred excessive fees for plan investments and record-keeping costs as the plan sponsor did not utilize lower-cost institutional share classes nor negotiate fixed fee arrangements for record-keeping services. Plaintiffs also allege that the plan sponsor did not have a prudent process in place for the consideration, evaluation, selection, or monitoring of investment options. Though the case was later dismissed by participants in 2016, it does highlight how even small plans need to take their fiduciary responsibilities seriously. A quick sidebar here regarding share classes. Each mutual fund has several different share classes and sometimes multiple share classes that are available to the plan on the record keeper's platform. Each share class of a mutual fund owns the same underlying securities, stocks, bonds, etc. The only difference is the cost. Retail share classes generally have higher expense ratios, while institutional share classes typically have the lowest expense ratios. Keep in mind that not every record keeper offers every share class, and some record keepers even have different share classes depending on the platform your plan is on. The key here is to be aware of the share classes offered by your record keeper to ensure that participants are receiving the lowest net cost option in that particular fund. I like to think about it like this. If I go to the store to buy a gallon of milk and the same exact gallon of milk is available to me in aisle 1 for $3 or in aisle 2 for $4, it only makes sense for me to buy the milk in aisle 1. Now, if I go to the store and the only milk that is available is in aisle 2 for $4, I'm comfortable buying that gallon for $4. Moving on to higher education, it's not just 401ks that are being targeted either. We're starting to see more litigation in the 403B space and higher education space. At this point, dozens of universities have been sued for numerous breaches that include familiar themes like excessive fees and improper investments. In the MIT case, allegations included that the plan sponsor failed to act in the best interest of participants by not going through a competitive bidding process for the selection of a record keeper. The university's relationship with its record keeper led to more than 150 proprietary funds, accounting for $3.5 billion of the total plan assets, all of which led to excessive fees being paid for record keeping services and was seen as an illicit kickback. The case was settled before going to trial for just over $18 million. And along with the monetary settlement, the plan sponsor will now be required to go through annual fiduciary training, submit RFPs for record keeping services, to at least 3 service providers, and determine a more fair and equitable method of allocating expenses to participants. Finally, going forward, communication with participants by the record keeper concerning non-plan products and services is prohibited. In the Emory University case, allegations included the fact that the plan used 3 independent record keepers, which was claimed to have led to excessive record keeping and admin fees for participants. This also led to 111 investment options being offered to participants, which attorneys claimed led to participants being overwhelmed by choices. The settlement in this case was $16.7 million. Non-financial items included issuing an RFP for record keeping services to at least 4 service providers, and similar to before, the university had to prohibit its record keepers from using confidential employee information to market non-plan products and services. Cybersecurity is the big buzzword on everyone's lips recently with the recent DOL guidance that was published on the topic. What's important to note about these cases is that cyber criminals in many instances are simply imposters posing as participants and using many of the available channels, such as the forgot password button or calling plan's customer service line, to gain access to information. For example, in the fiduciary breach case against Abbott Laboratories, a participant had just shy of $250,000 stolen from her 401k account after an imposter gained access to her account. The case against Abbott Labs was partially dismissed as the court said the plan sponsor's actions did not result in the theft. However, the courts ruled that the record keeper's actions did in fact contribute to the theft. Due to this increasing threat, the DOL has provided guidance that can help plan sponsors improve their due diligence processes and ensure service providers provide sufficient cybersecurity. Quid pro quo, just like it sounds, no other welfare or benefit plan should benefit from the 401k in any way. According to ERISA, decisions and actions taken by plan sponsors must be done for the exclusive and sole benefit of participants. As service providers offer plan sponsors and participants an increasing number of products and services, these arrangements can become less clear regarding who is truly benefiting and whether the decisions have been made with the best interests of participants at heart. In the Schneider Electronics case, it was alleged that the plan sponsor and service provider added proprietary target date funds to the plan lineup. This quid pro quo arrangement led to the expenses charged by the record keeper for the admin of the company's pension plan, but not the 401k plan, being significantly reduced compared to the expenses paid in 2016. Before we hop into the next case, I want to spend a minute discussing stable value funds and money market funds. So a money market fund is a type of mutual fund that invests in high quality short-term debt instruments, cash, and cash equivalents. Though not quite as safe as cash, money market funds are considered extremely low risk on the investment spectrum. They're typically characterized as low risk, low return funds. A stable value fund is a portfolio of bonds that are insured to protect the investor against a decline in yield or a loss of capital. The owner of a stable value fund will continue to receive the agreed upon interest payments regardless of the state of the economy. Stable value funds invest in high quality government and corporate bonds, both short-term and intermediate term. They are no different from any bond fund, except they are insured. An insurance company or bank is contractually obligated to protect the fund's investors from any loss of capital or interest. Historically, such funds provide a slightly higher rate of return than money market funds. Let's use that background to discuss the American Airlines case. In the American Airlines case, participants alleged that the plan offered the company's AA credit union fund, which was said to have, quote, tremendously poor returns and was effectively the same as a, quote, poorly managed checking account rather than a stable value fund. Based on these poor returns, participants weren't able to keep up with inflation. I'm going to pause there and ask everybody to make sure you're on mute. Based on these poor returns, participants weren't able to keep up with inflation through this investment option, which the complaint deemed to be a categorically imprudent investment under ERISA. Again, we saw a court dismiss this type of case as it found that the plaintiffs could not establish that American Airlines was required to select stable value fund, nor was there any procedural lapse. Overall, the courts have said that relying on the relative performance between these types of funds is an improper hindsight-based challenge. However, it is a topic still worth keeping an eye on. Lastly, improper investments covers a wide range of cases and teachings. One allegation seen recently was the failure to diversify claim leveled against Rollins, Inc. In this case, the plan's core menu included 12 mutual funds. 11 of these were equity funds. This also meant that only one fixed income investment option was available, and the plan did not include other low correlation investments, such as short-term government bonds, global bonds, emerging markets or emerging market bonds, or commodities. Based on this core menu makeup, the complaint alleged that participants incurred or would incur losses based on the lack of diversity provided to them via the plan's core menu. So now that I've given you a little taste of where the allegations and lawsuits are targeting and possibly put a few of you into a panic state, let's talk about how to best mitigate these risks and limit the fiduciary liability for your organizations and for yourself personally. The answer is twofold. We're going to first utilize the safe harbors provided to us by ERISA, and then implement a sound risk management process with a strong governance backbone. Before we dive in, I think it is important to note that as a fiduciary of a retirement plan, you are expected to act as a prudent man or woman would in similar circumstances. Actually, the exact standard is, quote, a prudent man acting in a like capacity and familiar with such matters, what he would use in the conduct of an enterprise of a like character and with like aims. Unfortunately, the government does not define exactly how a prudent person would manage retirement plans. However, the government has provided some guidance and relief in the form of ERISA safe harbors. In addition, we have learned via litigation and government audits what a sound risk management process looks like. The goal of this presentation is to demonstrate how you can use existing legislation to help reduce your fiduciary liability and implement a sound process to both improve outcomes for participants and meet regulatory expectations. Today, I'm going to provide you with specific actionable steps and best practices to take when you leave this webinar and return to your committee plan. So step number one, take advantage of those ERISA safe harbors. The federal government recognizes that plan sponsors want to do right by their employees. To that end, they have tried to encourage certain actions by offering some safe harbor exemptions that can actually help reduce a plan sponsor's liability. Now, when I say safe harbors, most people will immediately think of a safe harbor plan. That implies a safe harbor employer contribution, whether it be a match or non-elective. A safe harbor contribution is only one type of safe harbor that ERISA allows for in conjunction with defined contribution plans. The other ones you can take advantage of are on this screen, and we'll go through them quickly. To this end, the questions that you should be answering as we go through these next 6 slides is 1, Are you taking advantage of these opportunities to reduce your liability? And 2, if you're not, why aren't you? I want to pause here to say that it is okay if you aren't taking advantage of some of these, but you should have documentation that you have discussed them and the reasoning behind that decision. We're going to quickly play a little game of raise your hand if. Now, I know we can't actually see everyone on this call, but I want you to answer these questions in your mind and try to think about how the other individuals that sit on your investment committees would answer as well. So raise your hand if you consider yourself an investment expert. Now raise your hand if you have a securities license. Did you know that in order to give someone investment advice, you must have a securities license? Despite that fact, there is no license required to serve on a retirement plan committee and make investment decisions on behalf of participants as to which investment options they'll be able to select from. Now, how many of you have the time to sit at your desk and monitor the investment options in your retirement plan? Do you have an extra 10 to 20 hours to spare each week for this task? All of you already have a full-time job that takes up your time, right? So the Department of Labor is fully aware that retirement plan committees are composed of some very bright people that 1, have little time to spend on this task, and 2, are most likely not what the securities industry would consider to be investment experts. The DOL knows your committee is well-intentioned, but they also know that you may lack the expertise required to deal with investments. To that end, they have created 2 options within the safe harbor. The first allows you to share liability with a fiduciary who is an investment expert. This is known as the co-fiduciary option. You work together to make investment decisions. You may also know this option as the ERISA 321 or investment advisor option. The second allows you to completely outsource all decisions pertaining to the investment options and asset classes to a discretionary investment manager who will accept the liability for making those decisions on your behalf and in the participant's best interest. However, this does not completely absolve you from liability. The plan sponsor still has the responsibility to oversee a discretionary investment manager. Both of these options will reduce your liability when it comes to the selection and monitoring of investment options. After this call, you should do one of 2 things. First, figure out whether your current broker or advisor has accepted either of these fiduciary statuses. If they have not, your committee should determine what value they provide. Secondly, if you do not have an advisor taking on one of these roles, why not? Do the members on your committee have the investment expertise and qualifications necessary to fulfill these responsibilities? The next safe harbor is an administrative safe harbor. This includes things like loans, distributions, and notice fulfillment. There are a number of administrative tasks that you can outsource to vendors to reduce your liability and responsibility, and frankly, to give you some time back. These duties are typically assumed by the record keeper or third-party administrator. Most of these tasks have to be dealt with in accordance with the terms of your plan document. If you retain these tasks in-house, it is your responsibility to ensure that staff handles them properly. This slide shows a list of items you can outsource via this safe harbor. Your action item here is to determine whether your record keeper and/or third-party administrator have assumed responsibility for these tasks. And if not, you should review your plan document with staff to ensure they are adhering to all provisions. Now, it wasn't that long ago that we had to get participants to sign a positive consent form indicating they wanted you to withhold deferrals from their paycheck. The government has recognized for years that Americans are not saving enough money to support themselves in retirement. In fact, a 2020 study by Prudential found that 1 in 5 Americans weren't saving for retirement, emergencies, or other financial goals. In addition, the DOL has been concerned that many Americans were leaving employer money on the table by failing to contribute in order to receive the match. In order to encourage more saving, the government took 2 actions. First, they passed automatic contribution provisions that can be implemented with negative consent, most commonly known as auto-enrollment. And second, since all contributions must be invested per ERISA, the government provided an exemption whereby plan sponsors can place those automatic contributions into an investment option that qualifies as a default investment alternative, most commonly referred to as the QDIA. If plan sponsors utilize a QDIA, they are absolved from liability as long as the investment meets the required criteria set by ERISA. When you have time, take a look at the savings rates for your participants within every age group. Then take a look at their account balances. Most likely, you will find that the majority are failing to save enough for retirement. Now look at your medical claims and worker comp claims, time off for older staff. What we're hearing from many plan sponsors is the older generation cannot afford to retire and are hanging on to their jobs longer, and in many cases with reduced effectiveness and increased healthcare costs. If you ignore this issue while participants are younger, you may be stuck with bigger issues when they get older. Hopefully, if you have someone at typical retirement age who is still working, it's because they're motivated and enjoy work rather than forced to be there for financial reasons. So after that slide, one of the universal questions I get is, well, how do I increase the overall retirement readiness of my employees? And I'm sure most of you already know this, but it isn't an easy or quick fix, unfortunately. But there are things we can do from a plan design perspective that can help with overall retirement readiness while providing an additional layer of protection for you as the plan sponsor. As just discussed, you can automatically enroll participants into the plan. The safe harbor includes the right to determine what deferral percentage to start them at. In addition, you have the ability to auto-escalate their initial deferral rate on a regular basis until they hit a defined maximum contribution. The only thing you have to do is notify them that they're eligible and that they can opt out, and then notify them in advance of the automatic escalation taking place and remind them that they can opt out. The unfortunate thing about participant contributions in general is that they're limited in terms of dollars as well as discrimination testing. Participant deferrals in 2021 are limited to $19,500 for those under age 50 and $26,000 for those 50 or older. However, unless you have adopted a safe harbor match or contribution plan, those deferrals can be further limited by non-discrimination testing. Those considered highly compensated can only contribute on average 2% more than the average deferral rate of those considered non-highly compensated. Thus, you can see how automatic enrollment and automatic escalation can really improve the deferral rate of non-highly compensated employees, allowing those highly comps to contribute close to the dollar maximum. You can eliminate discrimination testing entirely by implementing a safe harbor plan. There are a few different varieties, but in essence, by ensuring participants receive an approved employer match or non-elective contribution, you can in return ensure that highly compensated staff has the ability to save the dollar maxes each year. So request a report from your payroll or record keeper with the number of employees failing to contribute, how many contribute less than the amount you match up to, and how many of your highly compensated employees were unable to contribute the maximum due to discrimination testing. You could be missing an easy solution that benefits your company. There's a specific code in ERISA that allows you to transfer liability for a participant's investment decisions within their account away from your company and to the participant. You may have already heard of it. It's called 404C. There are over 50 subsections to 404C that must be complied with in order to qualify for the exemption. If you fail to comply with them, then you have retained liability for your participants' decisions regardless of how misinformed they are. A lot of plan sponsors might assume that because they have a retirement plan and the participant can direct the investments within their own account, that somehow the company is not liable for those decisions. The reality is you are deemed liable unless you comply with all pieces of the exemption. The record keepers should all be aware of what is required by this ERISA code section, but they may require you as the plan sponsor to help fulfill pieces of the exemption. Although it does sound scary with 50 subsections, 404C is actually quite easy to comply with. Just to give you an idea, I want to read you a few of the subsection requirements. So one requirement is, does the plan offer at least 3 core investment options with materially different risks and return characteristics? So think 1 equity, 1 fixed income, 1 cash. 2, are participants permitted to transfer in and out of each core option at least quarterly? I don't know of a record keeper that limits that. So yes, that's typically yes. And then 3, are participants permitted to transfer out of the QDIA as frequently as other plan investments? And again, Yes, almost all record keepers will allow a QDIA and treat it the same as core investment options. The key here is just to make sure you understand your obligations as the plan sponsor and what is required of you, if anything. Prior to 2006 Pension Protection Act, you would actually increase a plan sponsor's liability by offering investment advice to a participant. That is why participants, for the most part, were completely left on their own to make investment decisions. By 2006, it was apparent to a lot of professionals in the retirement plan industry, including the Department of Labor, that participants both desired and probably needed help in the form of investment advice. Most record keepers now offer point-in-time advice to your participants, as well as some investment advisors. If your employees don't have access to someone that can provide them investment advice, why not? This might be something to consider. I also think it's worth noting here as a reminder that your HR team or investment committee should never be providing advice to employees on their investments, because that is not covered under the safe harbor. So that covers the ERISA safe harbors available to you. As a reminder, if you aren't taking advantage of any of these, that's okay, but you should be documenting the reason behind why. And speaking of documenting, we're now going to get into the second piece, my favorite topic here, which is process. So you can be judged by the government based solely upon your process. You can be judged by litigators based upon both process and results. The good news is results are the byproduct of a sound risk management process. If you comply with the 7-step process outlined here, you should easily be able to demonstrate your actions are compliant with the prudent man standard of care. And the process is easy. We're going to start with committee bylaws, which is the governance backbone. We're going to review and adhere to your investment policy statement, ensure you have fiduciary training in place, make sure we're documenting everything in the meeting minutes, review and understand the reporting provided to you, maintain a fiduciary file, and then get insured. There are 7 steps here, but the key is that we are staying true to the process. Or if you're a sports fan, the other way to think of that is to trust the process. Even the DOL has highlighted how important process can be in insulating against fiduciary liability. In a 2017 document titled Meeting Your Fiduciary Responsibilities, the DOL mentions the existence of this liability, but also notes that, quote, fiduciaries can limit their liability in certain situations. One way fiduciaries can demonstrate that they have carried out their responsibilities properly is by documenting the processes used to carry out said responsibilities. There are 3 main factors that you want to keep in mind when we talk about process. Fiduciaries need to ensure that they, 1, create a repeatable process, 2, consistently follow that process, and 3, document decisions made throughout that process. I hope nobody is counting how many times I'm about to say document in the next couple of slides, but that is so important, and it is a very important part of this process. So let's talk bylaws. Most companies have adopted corporate bylaws, which are simply an outline of how the company will operate. Ask yourself this question. Would it be prudent to operate a company with millions of dollars of assets without defining its bylaws, including the structure, composition, and responsibilities of those in charge? If it's prudent for a company to operate in accordance with bylaws, wouldn't it also be prudent for a retirement plan with millions of dollars in assets to do so? You should identify how these 4 topics will be handled in your bylaws. However, you must also be careful not to include provisions within your bylaws that you have no intention of following. The worst thing you can do is state an action will take place in writing and fail to act accordingly. I would recommend that you read your plan's bylaws or committee charter to ensure these topics are addressed. If you have no bylaws, this should be the #1 topic on your next meeting agenda. If you need a template, I'd be happy to provide one for you after the call. The investment policy statement is intended to serve as a blueprint to assist fiduciaries and their advisors in the ongoing management of the plan. Among other things, the IPS defines the criteria for the evaluation, selection, ongoing monitoring, removal, and replacement of funds. Here's a little retirement plan fun fact. ERISA does not explicitly require a written IPS. The reality is, though, in the event of a DOL audit, the IPS is at the very top of the list for requested plan documents. Some courts have found that an IPS is the central guiding instrument and the foundation for a prudent fiduciary process. They have gone as far as to question how fiduciaries can claim prudent plan management without an IPS. Having an IPS and then not following it is a clear indication that fiduciaries are violating ERISA's prudent expert standard of care. When reviewing your plan's IPS, ensure it provides a framework for making decisions and uses languages that's not too broad, but it's not too specific either. It is impossible to create a process that encompasses all the actions that happen within a vibrant marketplace, so some IPSs have an override clause that allows fiduciaries to take action in conflict with a provision, provided such action is solely in the best interest of participants. IPSs should also be regularly reviewed. For most plan sponsors on this call, you are more likely to run into a DOL auditor than a lawsuit. Although not specifically called out in the DOL regulations, fiduciary training for committees is understood as an industry best practice and has been used as support in recent litigation to rule in favor of plan sponsors. Also, according to the Plan Sponsor Council of America, several recent DOL audits included requests for plan sponsors to provide documentation of training within the last year. Plus, annual fiduciary training has become a stipulation within many settlements, as we saw at the beginning of this presentation. Hayes offers fiduciary training to our committees on a quarterly basis, and although not the most riveting of topics, as I'm sure some of my clients will tell you, it is one of the easiest ways to protect your committee and yourself as a fiduciary. I can tell you our experience with new clients is either zero training takes place or members learn under fire as issues come up. The goal of any training is that fiduciaries walk away with a sense of confidence that the house is in order and that they have the competence to operate prudently. Now, it's hard to imagine gathering the committee together, spending time reviewing the plan performance, then failing to document what took place. Meeting minutes are the proof that ties everything together. You must document attendance to demonstrate compliance with the bylaws. You must document decisions made to demonstrate compliance with the IPS and plan documents. You should identify all issues discussed to demonstrate actual oversight of operations, and you must describe actions that have been taken or to be taken to prove prudence. Your meeting minutes should be thorough and cover any and all issues taken up by the committee that are in purview of the committee. If your plan requires a large plan audit, I can almost guarantee you that your auditor will ask for the minutes for all reviews that occurred that year. Step number 5 in the process is reporting. The best way to demonstrate a prudent process is to examine and report on a regular basis about your investment options, fees, and plan demographics. The key here is regular. Many committees meet quarterly, but semi-annual and annual meetings may be appropriate as well, depending on your situation. Regardless of how often the committee is meeting, the investment monitoring piece should be occurring on a quarterly basis. Keep in mind your reporting is what will tell the story to anyone examining whether you have complied with the prudent man standard of care. These reports should be thorough and demonstrate compliance with your plan documents and written IPS. The more questions left unanswered by your reports, the less likely you have implemented a sound fiduciary process. And what is the point of taking meeting minutes and meeting quarterly and having all this reporting if there isn't a central location to pull all of the documents from in case of an audit? Fiduciary files can be hard copy files or electronic files. The key is to have a central location that is accessible to all committee members to save all pertinent committee and plan documents. At Hayes, we give all of our clients access to our fiduciary briefcase, which is a secure online portal that allows all committee members to have access to governance documents, meeting materials, and any other pertinent material. When it comes to the files, committees should ensure that they retain all documentation to prove process, respond timely to government audits, and provide auditor access for annual audits. When it comes to those audits, either your annual large plan audit or a DOL audit, less is more. Stick to the questions you're being asked. Far too often I see clients that are overly helpful or descriptive when being audited, and it can actually do more harm than good. Just remember to keep your answers brief and accurate. It's okay to make the auditor ask for additional information. Lastly, insurance. Insurance is never a substitute for a sound fiduciary process. However, those of you on retirement plan committees do have personal liability for all actions taken. There are two things you should do after this call. First, check what coverage is provided to you personally under your company's directors and officers policy. Second, ask your property and casualty agent for information about a fiduciary insurance policy that can cover all acts related to the plan, including malfeasance and fraud. Sometimes this is called fiduciary liability insurance. The last thing you want as a committee member is personal liability due to the retirement plan. But please note here that fiduciary liability insurance is different and separate from the DOL required fidelity bond or ERISA bond. Your action here is to find out whether you're covered, and if not, I would highly recommend that you do get covered, both yourself personally and the committee. So as we've seen, retirement plan litigation continues to change, and while we may not know what issues will be included in the next evolution of lawsuits, it will be the processes that you put in place today that will help guide you through the changes we see in the coming years. That process can serve as the foundation for the ongoing management of retirement plans, both big and small, but also as a tool to help you meet your fiduciary responsibilities and the retirement needs of your participants. Before we open it up to questions, I'll leave you with a quote by Irish poet William Butler Yeats that I think sums up the last 30 minutes or so. Life is a long preparation for something that never happens. The best thing you can do as a fiduciary is to prepare for the day that the plan is audited or under fire, with the hope and reality for most of you that that will never happen. So for those of you that are using this webinar for SHRM credit or HRCI credit, the activity or program IDs are at the bottom left of this screen. Also, if there are any templates or questions or checklists that you need, that you would like, that you heard about during this presentation, please feel free to send me an email. My email there is on the screen after this, and I'd be happy to provide that for you. With that, I will open it up. I will turn it over to Greg to see if there was any questions that came into the chat.
Okay, thank you so much, Anna. There definitely were. So let me get to some of these. The first one is, it says that you talked quite a bit about committee meetings and the governance for those meetings. And so the question is, do you have any recommendations on how many people should sit on the investment committee? And then what roles and positions, within the organization should fill those committee roles?
That is a great question. I'm glad somebody asked that. So like everything, there's not a blanket answer for this, right? And it's going to vary, but typically we see anywhere from 3 to 6 and at the maximum 7 committee members in our investment committee meetings. At a minimum, I think 3 is appropriate, especially for voting members. When it comes to which roles, it's really less about roles and more about backgrounds of those individuals fulfilling the roles and the desire to be part of the committee. We want the folks on the committee to be engaged in the process and to want to be there and serve in the best interest of participants. But in general, we typically see someone from the finance side, whether it's the CFO or controller, as well as support on the HR or people management side of that. And then filling in with even, individuals who maybe aren't on the executive team, but that can speak for maybe the larger population of employees is helpful as well. So I would say anywhere between 3 to 6, with again, 7 really being that maximum that we'd like to see on a committee.
All right, perfect. Thank you. There's a lot more, so I'll get to another one. And then I just wanted to remind people as we get closer to the end of time, if we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you. So this question came in and it says that their entire fund lineup for their plan is made up of R share classes. And so they're just wondering if that's a concern.
That must be in reference to the slide that we talked about where we had retail versus institutional and how the, the R, whether R1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6, whether those are share classes because they are technically retail share classes should be a concern. That was in that small plan litigation case with Lametry's collision that we saw. And the answer is no. I like to go back to my gallon of milk metaphor here. For a lot of record keepers, their platforms are, only offering our share classes. It really just has to do with the fee structure within that. There is no concern of having an entire share or an entire lineup with our share classes, so long as that is the least expensive share class offered on the platform you're on. I can say confidently that we have many clients on our book of business that also have our share classes because that is the lowest available share class on that platform. So yeah, no concern there.
Great, thank you. Another one that came in says, let me get to it here. Asking if you have a checklist that walks through those 404C requirements.
Oh, the fun 50 subsections? Yes, I do. If you're looking to see that, whether just to take a look, feel free to shoot me an email. That's another checklist I'd be happy to provide.
Okay, perfect. And maybe time for one more. Let's see. This one says, what sorts of things should be included in meeting minutes, so the investment committee meeting minutes, and then wondering about how detailed they should be with those meeting minutes.
Oh, these guys have really good questions. This is a really great question as well. We've actually done a lot of discussion about meeting minutes with our clients because what we really need to make sure in those meeting minutes is that we're documenting things that are on topic and within purview of the committee. We want to keep any sidebars, like things related to something that's non-ERISA. So anything, for example, discussion with a non-qualified plan or an annuity, that should not be in the purview of the 401k or the 403b committee, and should be kept outside of the formal meetings. So keep it on topic, keep it in purview of the committee, and I would say from a level of detail, do add detail. You want enough detail so that when you're reading it 3 years later, you know why you made the decisions that you made. And as we saw in that litigation and some of those settlements, and the ones that we've seen where they won in favor of the plan sponsors, it's because of those detailed meeting minutes showing the process and documenting the reasoning behind that. So that would be, I know it's not black or white, but just detailed enough that you can understand 3 years down the road why that decision was made.
All right, perfect. No, I mean, there are a lot, but I'm afraid we're going to have to just follow up with people on some of these questions because we're coming to the end of time and I wanted to give you a moment to wrap it up.
Perfect. Well, thank you all again for joining. I really hope that you found this information useful. Do not hesitate to reach out directly to me or to Greg if you have any additional questions or want to talk through any of these topics. So with that, I will say goodbye and I hope you all have a great rest of your day and a great rest of the week. Thank you.